Hello, and welcome to Yogahub podcast, where we bring you conversations with some of the world's leading yoga and movement educators. In this episode, I'm chatting to Michael James Wong. Michael is a yoga and meditation teacher who is the founder of Krama Yoga School and the Just Breathe meditation app. Michael is well known for running teacher trainings all around the world. And in this episode, we chat a little bit about his background with yoga, his extensive career teaching around the world. We chat a little about his approach to trainings and the importance of support for newer teachers in particular. We are very lucky to have Michael joining us for a weekend of workshops here at Yoga Hub Camden in Dublin from the 5th to the 7th of September. You can find out a little bit more information on this at yogahub.ie/workshops. But here's my conversation with Michael. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you very much for listening. All right, cool. So, Michael, a big thank you for taking the time out of your day to come on and have this conversation. I really appreciate it. I always like to start with what I consider to be the most important question of the day, which is, how are you doing?
I'm doing well today, I think. It's one of those days where, there's always something to do, and finding little moments like this, even just to have a nice chat, to kind of talk about the world of yoga and teaching and all those types of things can always kind of be mixed in with a whole list of other things to do. But for me, it's nice to have this little moment to kind of chat, see how things are going, and it's just a nice pause for the day. So, doing well.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I was thinking to myself, actually, before we got on to record, that I know quite a little bit about you and your teachings and your approach to yoga. I've never trained with you myself, but I know a lot of people who have. But I actually also don't know a huge amount about you. So I was wondering if we could begin by, in as much or as little detail as you would care to share, maybe letting us know a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe what you were doing before you got into the yoga world, and a little bit about your teaching career so far.
Yeah, so for me, as a person, I come from a very kind of mixed background, both culturally, geographically. So I was actually born in New Zealand, which a lot of people don't know, mainly because my accent sounds like where I grew up, which is in California. And then early on, my family moved to Los Angeles, Santa Monica, because of dad's work. And I was just very lucky to grow up in that environment where it was very much beach culture, sand, surf, sun. And it was just kind of a nice lifestyle for me. To kind of grow up in a sense of feeling that there was a lot of connection to the outdoors. At the same time, it was a place that was quite busy. LA is very hectic. And so, my kind of path has always been kind of a connection to lots of different kind of outlets. Where we grew up in LA, my family was in New Zealand. We had family all over. And so even in the earlier days growing up, I spent a lot of time traveling in a lot of different places, kind of venturing out. And my family was always kind of a big advocate of go out and see the world. So I suppose I grew up with a lot of perspective of there's different ways to do things. There's different things to try. There's lots of things to explore. And there's never really one right way to do it. And so for me, growing up in LA, I spent probably the better part of the first 25 years of my life, school, university, my first jobs there, where it was just about spend time and go out and enjoy myself and kind of deal with whatever life threw at me. When I was 25, I then was working at a job. I was working kind of like this kind of business marketing job. And I got laid off from that job. And at the time, my brother was living in Australia, in Sydney. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go visit my brother and spend 6 weeks on the beach, working at a pub, just having a bit of a holiday. And like a typical thing, I got there and three weeks later I had a job, and I stayed there for 5 years. And so it was really cool for me to go out and see the world in different ways, spend a bit of time in a different part of the world. And that kind of spurred on kind of my, I suppose, adventurous spirit to travel. And so spent there for 5 years and then ended up in the UK kind of in the early 2010s, about 2011 is when I came over here. And since then, I've been, let's call it, in and around this area of the world, spent a lot of time traveling and just kind of making an effort to kind of go see and explore. I was kind of lucky in that sense where I had many. I had a few different passports. I had a New Zealand passport, I have a US passport, I've got a British passport. My wife has a European passport. And so we have a lot of access into kind of different places to go visit. And for me, that was always exciting and interesting. And, it was kind of where I've come to now, but I still have really strong connections to different parts of the world. And so it's always been kind of part of kind of who I am as a person of many parts with different perspectives and places and kind of inspirations that have come from everywhere.
Very nice. And which part of all of this did you discover yoga? Did you practice from a young age, or where was your first encounter with it?
So I think probably like many people, I probably knew I was in and around the world of yoga growing up, but I wasn't in it. I was an athlete. I played basketball and football, and I kind of did the typical, teenager thing. And yoga never kind of crossed my path until like my early 20s, but it was very much around it and prevalent. I grew up in Santa Monica, which was one of the, let's call it, Western American epicenters of yoga, where all the early old school first generation teachers were. And so you'd always see people out and about with yoga mats, but I was very much like, that's not for me. That's what other people do. And I was in university. I went to UCLA in California. And there was just one day when we were in college, and I had a friend who was like, hey, do you want to come do a yoga class? Very typical. One of the girls who were part of the friendship group was like, hey, we're going to class. Do you want to come? And it was me and a few other guys who were like, that's going to be super easy. I don't think this is going to be a big ask. Let's all go and have a good laugh. But it was that first time for me where I got put into a room. And my first class was actually an Anusara class, which was back in the original City Yoga, which turned into a Yoga Works, which is in Fairfax in West Hollywood. And it was the first time I walked into the studio where in many ways, everything was way different than I expected. It was harder, it was stronger. People were nice. It was all these kind of things where it was just so different from the LA lifestyle that I kind of grew up with. And rightly so. I probably had a little bit of edge to myself, a little bit of an inflated ego for, a 19-year-old. I just kind of thought I knew how the world was and had it all figured out. But going into yoga, in many ways, I kind of got put on my backside just to kind of say, actually, there's a whole different situation going on here, a different thing that I can try. And I loved it. I always tell this funny story is when I went to that first class, I was in conversation with the person at reception. They're like, oh, do you want the 2-week, trial pass? Which the only reason I got the 2-week trial pass, because it was cheaper. It was it was whatever it was back in the day, $20 will get you 2 weeks as opposed to 18 will get you one class. So I signed up for the 2-week pass, knowing that I just wanted a better deal, went to that first class, never expecting to do anything more. But because I had this huge experience that was so unlike anything else, so humbling, so kind of different, that actually I then spent the next 2 weeks going back every single day, to the point where my friends who took me never came again. And I just was there by myself, practicing in like these long basketball shorts, or with kind of like my cotton pajama pants, or just anything that I thought could work. And it was kind of my first kind of step into the practice. And then luckily over time, I kind of met some good teachers, found some other studios to practice with, and just kind of gave me a whole different thing that I would just needed, even though I didn't know I wanted.
And what was it that first grabbed you out of interest? Was it like a physical thing, a curiosity thing, a mental thing? And I'm always interested in, people that have been practicing for a while. That first thing that grabbed you, how has that shifted over time?
Yeah, I think for me, and my first class was, let's call it roughly around 2002. So I was probably 19 years old. And I think at the time, I was very much typical LA kid who was 19 years old thinking I had the world figured out. And it was one of the first times when I went to a yoga practice where I couldn't like talk my way in or out of a situation. I actually first I couldn't talk for 60 minutes. It was hard. It was humbling. It was strong. I was relatively in shape, thought I was pretty good at most things physically. But, doing a downward facing dog, moving through a chaturanga, seeing people half my size or half as flexible do all kinds of things that weren't inaccessible to me. It kind of just showed me that life wasn't what I thought it was in my head. And so physically it was humbling. Mentally it was challenging. The fact that I couldn't talk my way in or out of it for 60 minutes. I couldn't make a joke. I was just I was disarmed in the best possible way. And it kind of woke me up to realizing that actually maybe where I was now wasn't the end game for kind of who I was or who I was meant to be.
Mm. And do you still find that now with your practice? Do you still get that same kind of humbleness from it?
Oh, absolutely. But I think, it's that typical in hindsight, everything's a little bit more clear. I already go into practice knowing I don't know everything, and then I'm definitely not going to be able to do everything. And so I think over the past 20 years of practice, it's been able to chip away mainly at the ego, the expectations, to kind of just show up as is. And like all of us, we've all gone through different phases of practice. In those first early years, I was physical, 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 do everything, try everything, anything upside down, anything on one hand or two, anything that just kind of stroked the ego in those early years, which was important. When you're 19 years old, you need to have something that feeds it in a way that helps support a direction you're moving. But over time now, kind of now into my early 40s, I'm very happy to be the first one in Shavasana and the first person taking the modification, but at the same time, really approaching it from what is the energetics of the practice? What's the perspective of the practice? What's the wisdom we can take out of the practice? And then also there's other days you just go and have a little bit of fun. Not every practice has to be serious. Been big into hot yoga this year, which is a shift from where I've been the last few years, and it was kind of one of my first loves because it was just a reconnection back to the physical practice.
That's cool. And I have to say, for someone in your early 40s, you're definitely a great advertisement for the benefits of sustained practice. You're looking fantastic, if I do say so.
I'll take that. I'll take it. It's genetics, it's cultural, it's yoga. I'll take it all.
You must be doing something right. And so, sorry, what is it that's brought you back to hot yoga? Just the fun, the challenge?
Well, I mean, early on, so I was always kind of a hot yogi when I started, which a lot of people don't realize. It's like if you've met me in the last 10 years, you'll think everything I do is a little bit more gentle, thoughtful, kind of philosophically led, or just kind of a little bit at a smoother pace. But early on for me, the practice was very much hot, strong, fast. And for me, I'm not an advocate of either or. It was just that's what I needed at that time. My mind moved quick. My body needed something to do. That's what harnessed my sense of awareness, my stillness. So I spent the first probably 8 years of my practice in a hot room, doing strong vinyasa sequences. I was trained in power yoga and Baptiste yoga, hot rooms. And so part of that for me was the discipline of the physical body helps to master the discipline of the mind, which is what I was taught. And then recently, in the past kind of year for me, it's kind of been returning to that, mainly because of life off the mat, kids, life, wife, job, busyness, trainings. There's all the things that kind of can put a lot of things on the table that kind of take your attention. For me, coming back to a hot room to practice means there's nowhere else to go, nowhere else to hide. And I've doubled down and I've committed myself going to 6:30 a.m. practices. So 6:30 a.m. hot practices for me is actually my dedication at the moment to kind of get back in the room to recommit to, the practice as a whole.
I've had a slightly similar shift to you, not necessarily with hot yoga, but I haven't been practicing or teaching as long as you have, but similar at the beginning. I would have been drawn in by very like dynamic, active, creative vinyasa style practices. And as my own interests and understanding of what I gain from these practices and what I feel other people will potentially gain as well, kind of moving towards a slightly more specific and methodological, you know what I'm trying to say, that kind of approach to things was something I found really beneficial. But over the last while, I've refound my love for just kind of crazy vinyasa classes and, classes that are maybe not as structured in a certain sense or a little bit like crazier, and sort of just enjoying the kind of ritual of the movement as opposed to, I'm doing this movement to improve my overhead shoulder flexion or whatever. As you're saying, like, we don't need to focus on one way or the other kind of approach. But I've been drawn back in by the kind of craziness of dynamic vinyasa yoga, which I wasn't expecting in my mid-30s.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I think it's a big part of the evolution of a teacher. And obviously, like you as well, Brian, it's like we spend a lot of our time in training rooms, doing a lot of teacher trainings and working with teachers. And part of that means your brain's always in that phase of logistics, clarity, understanding, refinement, which is such an important quality as a teacher, especially in those roles of being of service and being in training. But actually, these kind of personal practice, I call them personal practice, right? A personal practice where I'm just going to hot yoga for me. Don't need to have a chat to anyone. I'm going to a local studio near my house where I don't know anyone, and realistically, no one knows who I am. It's 6 a.m. when I'm getting there. It's dark half the time. So for me, it's a personal practice. So I'm just going to have an outlet for my own kind of return to the practice, where by the time I get home or I go straight into a training room or go straight jump on an airplane to go to a workshop somewhere else, you're then going into me as a teacher. What is it that's important to share? What's important to kind of offer? How do I make sense so it makes clear, so it's clear for me and my students? So having those kind of personal practices, those little outlets where I can just return to the joy of the practice, the fun of the practice, that's important, because otherwise it's just in that position of always just kind of staying down one lane as a teacher or as a teacher training, where the expectation is this of you that you put on ourselves, but also from your students, knowing that there is a sense of wisdom and intellect being shared. So you have to have those moments for yourself. And I think that's fun. I think it's important. And I think we can sometimes lose the fun of yoga when it becomes a bit too serious, when there's always kind of a progression, a need, a training, or an outcome out of it. And I think that's important as you get a little bit older or you spend more time teaching the practice, is that you don't want to lose the joy of it that you have within it.
Mm. I'll have to try and come join you for a 6:30 hot class sometime next time I'm over in London. I know you mentioned a little bit about some of your early trainings and stuff. So how did your teaching career begin? Was it like something you felt drawn to from early on? Was it something you sort of fell into a little bit? And what were those early teaching days like for you?
So I was very much a person who had no ever ambition to be a teacher, no ever ambition to do anything more in yoga other than just enjoy it for myself. And in those early years, when I was living in LA, and then after when I moved to Sydney, because I was probably I was practicing and teaching in LA. I was practicing in LA for about 3 or 4 years before I moved to Sydney, where I did my first trainings right as I was leaving LA and right as I got to Sydney. And for me, in those early days, where I got into it was just the public general open classes weren't giving me enough of what I wanted intellectually or informationally. I think, you go through those phases where you're in a Tuesday lunchtime class and there's only so much you can learn about a wheel pose. There's only so much you can learn about Kapalabhati. It kind of gets offered and then it kind of moves on. And so at that time, I was probably practicing 12 to 14 times a week. I was very much morning or an evening practices, or doing doubles in the evening. And it was just a personal practice for me that was really a big shift in my life and lifestyle. I also was lucky where, growing up in LA, I just happened to be around teachers who now are regarded some of the most well-known, well-loved Western modern teachers. They were just the teacher down the road at the local studio. I had no idea who they were. I had no context of kind of their expertise or kind of how well established they were or just what they had to share. That was just the closest studio, and those were just the teachers. And so I was lucky early on where I was practicing with Annie Carpenter at Exhale Studio in Venice. I was practicing with Brian Kest in Santa Monica. I was practicing with different teachers who later became my teachers, but I naturally was just practicing in those environments where the quality of yoga was really good. The quality of teaching was amazing. And that's just kind of what I grew to expect. And so my first trainings were just about, I want to learn more. I want to know more. So I signed up for a power yoga training. I signed up for, a Baptiste training. I signed up for these trainings where it was just at those times. And this is interesting, like 20 years ago, there was classes and then there was teacher training. There was not overly too many workshops. Definitely weren't short CPDs. There wasn't 50 hours of this and 20 hours of this. The jump was go from regular studio student to sign up for a teacher training. So for me, that was the only logical next step to learn more, was to sign up for a training. And I went in with every ambition to not teach, just to learn more, get a lot out of it. And then, like many people, you kind of get the nudge, get the bug, and somehow along the way, you just find yourself in the seat of a teacher. And that's just kind of led me where I am now.
Yeah. And when did you, like, when did you sort of realize or decide, like, okay, this is my thing. I'm good at this. I enjoy it. This is what I'm gonna do.
I resisted it for a long time because I always had a job. I always had other things that were of interest. I spent a lot of my background, like academically, I come from like a psychology and sociology background. That's what my degrees are in. So a lot of it was very much about working with human behavior, understanding how we kind of support the needs of people. And so I always have my job on one side and my yoga on the other. And so literally probably for the first 5, 8 years, I was just teaching nights and weekends. I'd teach one on Saturday and a Tuesday night and a cover on a Friday. And it was very much just something to do where all the people I liked to hang out with were yogis. So that's why I'd always gravitate my free time towards yoga and teaching yoga and being in those spaces. And a lot of times it was kind of, for me, the place where I felt community. I felt like there were people that we could hang out with and have conversations was. And I was lucky in that sense where those early studios had lots of like communal areas, social activities. They had studio nights to hang out. There was just things that felt like there was quite a buzz about it, which was really cool for me. And I remember early on when I was doing a teacher training in Australia, this would have been about 2006, 2007, where I had a teacher after the training and he was like, hey, you enjoy training. Why don't you come assist? And so I assisted at the studio. And at that time, the studio, you couldn't teach at the studio unless you were assisting for 6 months. So I signed up to assist for 6 months, just the different teachers. And I'd go in, I forget now, twice a week at whatever times. And I would just assist classes, assist, and just be around it. And then one day, one of the senior teachers was like, hey, do you want to teach Sun A, Sun B? And I was like, absolutely no, not going to happen. I'm good. I was like, there's 60 people in here and you want me to like do the thing. And obviously at that time, I think I chickened out. But then shortly after it was like, look, the teacher didn't show up. You've been here for 6 months. You need to do the thing now. Like you're as prepared as you're going to be. And it was just do the thing. And I remember after teaching that first class to real people at a real studio, it was kind of a whole different experience. And it kind of gave me that kind of feeling like, you know what, this feels right for me. And then just over time, it's just evolved into something that's kind of become a big part of kind of who I am and kind of what I share.
It's a really, I've never come across that before, that getting someone just to teach a small little section of a public class. It's a really lovely, like, little introduction.
Yeah,
a nice idea.
it's a very old school way to do it. So, because I mean, you would know this from yogahub. There's 2 different types of ways people do training. You do it within a studio or within a school that you're a part of. You're a member at that studio. So there's kind of that community feel that's supported, or you go off and do a training somewhere and then you just come back to wherever you live. I was lucky to be in one of those environments where the training was in the studio that I practiced at already 5 times a week and whatever it was. And so, yeah, a lot of the new teachers, there was, hey, you're assisting this class, you're going to do Sun A's and Sun B's. So there's 10 minutes here, or you're going to do the 10-minute this somewhere else in the sequence. So that way you have the safety net of a senior teacher being in the room in case it all goes sideways. At the same time, everyone in the studio knew that was the case. So there was a supportive environment. It wasn't just, oh, why is Vanessa standing up doing this random thing? Or why is Michael talking instead of Tim? And so it kind of had that kind of environment, which really supported teachers. But at the same time, it was also super nerve-wracking because there was multiple times I was just practicing as a student where the senior teacher would go, Brian, why don't you just sit down for now? I'll take over. And you just see Brian crumbling onto the side going, oh dear, as you've been sent back to your mat because clearly it wasn't up to scratch. And then the teacher takes back over. And it was one of those things, it was trial by fire, but it was the nudge that was needed for me and a lot of teachers, because going from no teaching to a whole 60 minutes unregulated, unattended, or maybe a teacher just somewhere in the back of the room taking notes, it kind of was a really nice kind of progression or opportunity, which I don't see as much anymore, but I'd love to see out there in the world because it's a great way for teacher development.
Yeah, for me. It's actually a lovely little bit of inspiration. I'm
Mm.
gonna put that in my back pocket and see what I can do with it. You mentioned community a lot there, and I do get the sense that that's a very important thing for you in terms of like yoga and what you like to share. Actually, I first came across you, um, that'd be a long time ago now, through the Boys of Yoga, the website or a collective. I'm not sure how you'd like frame it that you had going. Where, for anyone who's not aware, the Boys of Yoga was this thing where you would get like male yoga teachers, and my interaction with anyways was with the website. You had lots of free classes up with different male teachers doing their thing, and it was great. I used to practice with it a lot and learned a lot of stuff and got exposed to some cool teachers. So I'd love to know, because I guess I kind of a two-pronged question: the inspiration behind Boys of Yoga as a thing, where that came from, and how that ties into the importance of community within the practice of yoga.
Well, first of all, that's really cool that you found that project. I mean, the whole essence of that project was really important to me and very meaningful. So obviously, as I said, I grew up in LA or in Santa Monica, where yoga was a very prevalent part of the community and the culture. And so there was a lot of people who I felt looked like me, that came from my background. There was a lot of surf skate culture in the yoga studios. But then when I went traveling and I went out to Australia and then I came over to the UK, I felt like it wasn't there. I felt a little bit like it was behind, not in the sense of the practice, but just in kind of the reflection of the community. Now, Australia was a little bit better than perhaps the UK at the time, because they still have their own surf skate culture there, Sydney being near the beaches. Especially when I came to the UK, I felt like there was this absence of what essentially was like my boys, my friends, the types of people that I would hang out with, that I'd also go to yoga with. And there was kind of this separation or segregation between yoga people and then the other people I hung out with. And so I was very lucky to come from that background, and also very lucky to have a certain skill set or a certain kind of ability to kind of create a community around that approach. And so that early project was very much about how do we turn the lens of the yoga world slightly in a different direction to create accessibility. And it was really interesting because we launched that project in like 2015, and it was both highly celebrated but also a little bit controversial. There were people who really loved the fact that we turned the lens a different way, and we shared stories about different people, different teachers from all over the world, people who just kind of looked and sounded like me, or people who were of a kind of different background who were just finding the practice. Because at that point, it was very much the practice looked one way. There was a lot of, all the media showed it one way. And so there was definitely a huge appeal for if you were part of that audience. But if you weren't, there wasn't a relevant connection point. And so I spent the better part of 2 or 3 years just traveling and teaching. And at the time, I was kind of teaching already probably 30, 40 kind of different workshops a year. I don't know, maybe that 20, 30 different workshops kind of a year in different places. And so as I would go, I would just meet different people like yourself, who would just be like, oh, Brian's a great teacher. He's a really cool dude, but he's not being, that perspective of yoga isn't shared as widely. And so I kind of made it part of my mission or my service as a teacher at that point to celebrate that part of the community, which became a really big focus over those early years, and it created a lot of access point. And the most interesting thing about that, it wasn't just the access point for people like you and I, people who were seeing themselves in it, in a lens that kind of wasn't shared, but it was a huge positive response for the rest of the community that says, oh, actually, it's the first time my brother, my dad, my friend at work could ever actually take yoga seriously. There was a conversation that actually meant it wasn't just for this kind of person. And it kind of that project led me to so many cool different places. I remember out of the blue, I got an email early on. It was like, hey, would you be up for coming and bringing the project to New York to teach with Dharma Mitra at Wanderlust? And I'm just going, this is a very strange email to get. Like, are you sure you're emailing the right person? And then it was one of those places that I ended up in different places because the message and the community was what people needed to see and to hear. And that was always what was the underpinning for me of community. It was all of my work is community based, whether it's the stuff we did at Just Breathe. The stuff we did at Boys of Yoga, the stuff we now do at Just Breathe, the stuff we do with all of our teaching community. it's about what I've always said is it's opening as many doors as possible to find the way in which people can walk into the practice. And whether you walk in through the meditation breathwork door, you walk in through the boys of yoga door, you walk in through the hot yoga door, or you walk in through the teacher training door, once you're in the room, the practice does the rest of the work. The biggest resistance for a lot of people is finding their way in that feels like it's a place that they belong. And that for me, with that project and all of our project, is very much the ethos that all of my teaching abides by, is how can we actually create different doorways for people into the practice.
Yeah. For me, with the boys of yoga thing, it wasn't even necessarily like a gender thing necessarily, although maybe to like a certain degree. But for me, as like someone who was very much enjoying yoga, I had done a training. I wasn't teaching, but I was practicing a lot. But for me, it was that kind of accessibility aspect of it, that like I would do the classes online, and it wasn't like 10-15 minutes of like passive seated stretches, which for me was like absolute torture. It was like movement and rhythm and stuff that just allowed me open doors, I guess, like you were saying. And you did a really good job there. You did a really good job. It was a really, really nice project.
I think the project was great, and sometimes people ask me, why is the project still not going? And in many ways, it could still have a huge amount of kind of do great work with it. But the initial ethos was always like, the whole aim of the project is that the project's not needed anymore, if that makes sense. Is that if we continue to create the awareness, to open lots of doors, to allow people to find their ways in different ways into the practice, then actually that project isn't specifically needing, because there'll be new projects, new things, new doors. And I think in many ways it did serve its purpose. It was of a certain time, where now there's a huge the huge cultural shift of the types of people you see in the room. There's all kinds of people in the room, all kinds of kind of perspectives in the room. And for me, it was kind of a project that served its time in a really, really great way. And while it there kind of sits around in the background here and there and comes up in conversations like this, it really is about just celebrating the fact that, the practice itself is such a valuable thing for everyone's life. It's finding the ways that people can kind of find their connection point in it and allow them that sense of belonging.
Yeah. It also seemed like a nice like launch pad for certain teachers. Teachers who I'm sure would have gone on to do very, very well regardless. But people like Adam Hustler, I think it was the first time I came across him. And Marcus Veda. I'm going to London in September to do a training with him in the 4 beat stuff, which I like enjoying the slightly crazy vinyasa style classes again. And 2 dudes who have like quite different approaches and stuff, but it was a nice way to kind of platform different people in a way, which is really cool.
And it was, and just, on that, it was really interesting. And that's why community is really important to me. Because, back in the day, and I'm going like 10 years ago, the world of yoga wasn't run by brands. It wasn't run by the internet. It was very much just community led. And it was, how do we put different personalities in the room so you can actually just have a central meeting point for knowing what's out there in the world. And I think social media and the internet has done a huge amount of work to help create closer access points to people over the world. But absolutely, it was a place where people could be introduced to new teachers, in a place that, all the teachers who were part of that project were great teachers in their own right. It was just putting them in a place where people can actually connect with them in a different way.
And as someone, I'm sure a lot of people will be familiar with you through your, not just your yoga teachings, but also your work around like meditation and breath work. 2 things obviously not necessarily separate from the practice of yoga, but and you mentioned there the sort of changes that you've seen over the last 10 years and I'm sure even longer. And I'm curious to know how you've seen those changes impact the practices, such as like meditation and breathwork, as these things, particularly breathwork getting so popular recently, and where you maybe see the pros of those changes have been, but also maybe is there things that you see that are kind of being lost through those changes as well?
Yeah, I think it's really, over the years, there's always evolution of the practice. And when I started the practice in the early 2000s, which essentially is a reflection of when the practice came west or had a little bit more popularity and notoriety in the late 80s and 90s, And that in the early stages was very much a physical practice. It was, that finding those connection points with the physical movement, the effort. And then, as the times evolved over the last 10 years, there's been a big shift towards meditation practices as the first thing. It was yoga as a physical practice, moving into the slowing it down as an alignment focused technical practice, into essentially the wave of meditation as a way of kind of harnessing that inner awareness of the practice, into essentially, this now kind of elevation of pranayama and breath work as a practice. I think it's that perspective that I take of it's all good and it's all good. At the same time, it's what's lost or what's left behind. And for me as a teacher and as a yogi, I've always been someone who's just followed what I've felt connected to, and knowing that it's never about one or the other. It's not about this way is right and this way is wrong. It's just what things allow me to explore as much of the practice as possible. And, one of the things that one of my teachers always says is that the point of the practice is it's meant to be timeless. It's a timeless practice, but there's always going to be moments where it's of a certain time. If you look back and you take a snapshot, 5 to 10 years ago, the practice was very much about meditation, mindfulness, quietness. Now it's very much breath work in the practice, nervous system regulation, all those kind of things that kind of become a moment in time of the practice that just kind of add to the evolution of the practice, because the physical practice will always be here. It will always stay with us and evolve in different ways. Iyengar says the easiest access point for yoga is always the physical practice, because it's tangible, it's instant, it's the way in which we can feel and touch it. And so whatever pathway that finds you in the practice, it's now kind of celebrating the phase that we're in. And I think part of the evolution of where we are now is, I think the most important thing to remember is that we have to maintain an element of curiosity with the practice. We can't just think we've figured it out. We can't just think this is the right way to do it, because ultimately every individual person is different. Every approach to the practice is unique. Every body type moves in a different way. And so even with as much anatomical insight there is about the practice, or as much information we have about the nervous system or how the breath works, it's always going to be, depends on the person, depends on the environment, depends on how it's received. I always talk about in my teaching is that the 3 most important words are perhaps, maybe, and it depends. And so that consideration comes from elevating the information or the wisdom that you have about the practice, and then layering it into what's relevant for where you are in the room.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of ties me on to the next thing I'd love to pick your brains about a little bit. And as you said, a lot of different approaches. Different approaches can connect with different people at different times for different reasons. But as someone who has been teaching trainings for quite a long time now, someone who's very well established in that field, 2-pronged question for you. What do you feel makes a good teacher, and what do you feel makes a good training?
Ooh, those are really good questions. What do I think makes a good teacher? I think if I was to give kind of the first thing that comes to mind is, I think a good teacher is someone who understands they don't know it all, but is willing to continually learn. I think right now, one thing that maybe is moving in the wrong direction with teachers, and this is just my perspective, and maybe it's because I'm a traditionalist or come from a lineage of teaching, is that we're now in a phase of yoga where there's a lot of teacherless teachers. Right? There's a lot of teachers. Yes, you might have done a 200-hour training. Yes, you might have recently gone off and did a training in a different country, or you teach at a studio. But there's this phase where teachers don't have teachers, right? Teachers who they actually learn with, spend time with, study with. That element of longevity or lineage for me is being lost. And I think to be a good teacher is to know that you are not the highest authority in anything, that there's always a lineage and a pathway that it comes to you. There's always people around you that can support you. One of the questions I always ask in a teacher training to any teacher or any person that I'm working with is, one of the first questions I always ask is, how and where do you spend your time? time being an acronym for the 4 types of people you need to have in your life if you're in this kind of world of teaching, which is T for teachers. Who are your teachers? And that doesn't have to be the most amazing person who is whatever. It just could be, I go to Brian's class Tuesdays and Thursdays. He's nice enough to answer a few questions. I remember what he's saying, and I take a few notes, and I see if I can bring that into my teaching, right? So teachers. Then you have people who are inspiring you, and those could be other teachers. Those could be people on the internet. Those could be authors that you read. Those could be, anything that brings inspiration into your teaching. I think is really important, because there is an element of tunnel vision sometimes as teachers. Is I do a thing, I know a thing, and this is my thing. So what's inspiring into that kind of perspective? The M is mentors. So who's actually helping you in your journey in and around teaching? Not just kind of like, who knows the answer to my anatomy question? Can I call, if Brian, if you were my mentor, can I call Brian and say, hey, I'm having a little issue with a student who's coming in late and I don't know how to deal with that? How do you have mentors who support you? And then the last part, the E, that's experts. Who are the experts that you lean into, right? Unless you're a neuroscientist, you're not a neuroscientist. Unless you're a therapist, you're not a therapist. As a yoga teacher, you get asked to wear a lot of hats, or to kind of sit in a lot of roles that are outside of your scope of understanding. So if you don't have experts or people that you can go to, or people you can look into, or listen to their podcasts, or read their books, you don't have resources that are going to support your teaching. And so right now, to be a good teacher, I think you need to understand you can't do it alone, and you can't be everything to everyone. And that's really important. And so that means you can be a brand new teacher, or a teacher who's been teaching for 20 years. But if you're trying to do it all alone and you think you can be everything to everyone, then ultimately you're not going to be in that seat of support that are helping people move along the practice through their kind of journey of yoga. And in saying that, the training should reflect that, right? So for me, for all of my trainings, it's important that I'm not the only voice in the room, that there's other experts, there's other teachers in the room. And it's really important for me that anyone who comes to my trainings or workshops or classes know that it's through my perspective. It's always a depends. It's always a maybe. Yes, I've got potentially a little bit more time in the practice, a few more years in training. But at the same time, what I know is what I know. What I don't know is what I don't know. And if that works for you, if you're coming to look for a 100% definitive answer about yoga or something within the practice, my trainings aren't for you. When you come to my trainings, oftentimes you'll get a lot of answers, but you'll also get a lot of questions. You'll leave with a lot more interest that says, okay, well, that was interesting about that. Great. Now go see that person. Go find more about that. If you really want to learn more about that, I got a great recommendation. If you want to learn about traditional Chinese TCM approach to yin yoga, I'm not your guy for that, but I can send you to someone who can be. And so for me, trainings were always a part of what one of my teachers always said is, every training and every teacher is just a link in the chain that links you to the longevity of the practice. Our job as teachers is to attach ourselves to that chain, knowing that we're available for other people to connect to us, but also knowing that we're supported by the whole link, all the links in the chain that make the strength of the practice what it is.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful answer. Thank you very much. I won't put you on the spot too much, and also in the interest of time, but to ask you to share all of them, would you mind sharing with us one of your bits of the time acronym?
As in, like, who do I spend my time with?
Yeah, one of the T, I, M, or E. Would you mind sharing one of those with us?
Yeah, I mean, I'll show you all of them because I think it's important as well. I think for me, when I go through the acronym, my teacher is Annie Carpenter. Annie Carpenter lives in Oakland, California, originally spent most of her time in Los Angeles. And I've done all of my advanced trainings with Annie, have assisted trainings with Annie, spend time with Annie, pick her up from the airport, drop her off at the train station. For me, Annie is my teacher, who's someone who I really believe carries the spirit of the whole complete practice. And while I've done many trainings and spent lots of times with different teachers and different styles, I'll always kind of return back to that lineage of Annie's practice, Smart Flow Yoga, because I believe that she carries the wisdom and the knowledge that can support me where I'm going and the part of the practice that I really connect to and bring that forward. So that's my teacher. As far as points of inspiration, these days I find a lot of my inspiration from a lot of my peers who are out in the world, in the yoga world, doing interesting things. Like Matt Giordano in the US, spent a lot of time with him because the ways he's advancing and looking at the practice from a very technical point of view, anatomically. There's a meditation teacher in Sweden called Lama Shimi, who's a Buddhist meditation former monk. Spent a lot of time looking and being inspired by her work, because while she's a meditation teacher, her whole ethos is about her speed. Her whole approach is, while everyone thinks the world of meditation is slow, her approach to teaching is we need to do it faster, because there's an urgency in the world right now for these practices to be out there. So meditation teachers need to move faster. They need to speak quicker. They need to go out and do the work because there's so much need out there. And for me, those kind of points of inspiration really influence and impact the way that I teach and the perspective that I bring into it. I've got kind of different mentors that I work with, whether business mentors or training mentors, but at the same time, those kind of approaches are really important. And then experts, I kind of work within the wider wellness world. So Dr. Sophie Mort, neuroscientist. I spend a lot of time with her picking her brain about technical questions. I spend a lot of time with Dan Morgan, who's our breath science expert, and kind of looking at nuances of practice. And so for me, it's while I have a few that I can call out now, the reality is it's kind of knowing that I don't know everything and knowing kind of who to turn to for questions and interesting things that pop into my brain.
I appreciate you sharing. Thank you very much. I'd love to keep chatting to you longer, but in the interest of time, I know we've got family things and all sorts going on, so I won't keep you too much longer. But we're very lucky to be hosting you with us here at Yoga Hub. Soon, I think. Is it October? September. Happy days. So it'd be nice maybe to finish, if you want to give people a small little preview of what they can expect for the weekend that you're with us.
Yes, so I'm excited to be back in September at Yoga Hub, and what I'm coming over to do is share a weekend of workshops and practices that are within our Krama Yoga system, which is our training system, all about the focus on how we do anything in practice. So the progress and the way in which we practice with purpose. So I'll be doing a teacher's technical breakdown where we're going to look at wild thing, back bends, and shoulder openers. We're going to look at kind of our dynamic practice in the Vinyasa Krama sequence. And we're going to do a ladder flow sequence, which is a fun kind of break the mold of your practice, which has a little bit more vibrancy and kind of that return to the joy of the practice. And that will be the weekend where I'm over supporting anyone who wants to come around, come for a visit. We'll do a practice, share a bit of time together. And for me, it's just nice to be back in the community, kind of with you all.
Yeah, we're very much looking forward to having you back. And Michael, thank you again for taking the time out of your day to have this chat. It was lovely getting to know you a little bit better. I know our paths have crossed quite a few times, but really nice getting to hear a bit more about your background, your approach, and really appreciate it. We should be seeing you very soon, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Brian.